So look, Owen, here we are sitting in the seats of power and surrounded by this amazing sort of surroundings of words and ideas. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration behind this remarkable idea?
The inspiration was obviously the chair, the seat of power. And it was something that had sat in my head for years, that actually the hammer and sickle would make an incredible frame to a chair. And 10 years ago, I had this bizarre dream about the Stars and Stripes. And as I fell asleep and had this dream, the stars turned into doves and they started flying across the stripes. And this was when Obama and Hillary were slugging it out in the primaries back in 2007. And there was no political undertone to this dream at all. And the joy of what I do is I can turn my whimsies into tangible things. And anyway, so I made the rug. And a year later, that rug was given to Obama as a gift from the Irish nation. So now we fast forward 10 years, and it's incredible how quickly a political landscape can change in 10 years.
Is, yeah.
And so this idea of the chair with the frame being the hammer and sickle, and now a new incarnation of the same design being the Stars and Stripes with the doves flying across the stripes, suddenly has a different political resonance. And it could be that obviously the stars in the American flag are the individual states, and are they fleeing from the Union because of where they're sitting within this particular design. I have always felt that the current president is like Claudius. He is extremely rich, and like Claudius, was also extremely rich, wants to rabble-rouse and become, effectively in the Roman sense, a plebeian, just for attention and it's the most astonishing conceit that I, as a very self-indulgent billionaire, have something in common with blue-collar America.
So the implication of this is that it was Trump's election that was kind of the thing that crystallized the idea?
Yeah, I have. Look, like many of us, we can flip and flop as centrists between Democrat, Republican, Conservative, Labour, you name it. We'll all probably vary as each election comes along. What I have an absolute anathema to is the bully and the charlatan. And he seemed to embody all of that. Now, I may be doing the man an enormous disservice and injustice. But
probably not, though.
Probably not. And certainly the persona he likes to project is that. And, I am the straight talking and nobody messes with me. So effectively, what all this the whole point of all of this is power. And we all have equal power. I have one vote, you have one vote. And has that power now been subverted, diluted, and what we in a sort of smug, liberal Western world think, we are morally superior because of our form of democracy, are we actually sleptwalked our way into a situation where we are blindly believing whatever propaganda is put out there in a much more subliminal way than it ever was by Goebbels or Lenin or Stalin. This is now, it's sort of invidious and seeping into your subconscious through something you might see on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. The era of fake news and the genius of Trump, the master of fake news, has accused all straight news of being fake.
Yes, what Freud called reflection, where you impose upon people the very thing you're guilty of yourself. So there you are, and you're a globally renowned creative. You make these incredible rugs. You're known for a whole variety of things. But was it a conscious pivot to move into what is unquestionably political art? No,
because I think if whenever something is consciously done, it is a sort of fabrication. There's no resonance or integrity to what it is you're doing. I think some of these things, I'm sort of intellectually stimulated by what I see around me and whatever a political situation may be. Now, if we had just sort of cruised on from Major to Blair to Brown, and everything was just oh so down the middle, then possibly none of this would ever occur to any of us. And what I find interesting, and it's sort of accidental, the journey of this is totally accidental, and then what you discover as you roll down that road is really you start reflecting back on the last 25, 30, 40 years, and you realize that there has been no political statement from the world of design in the last 40 years. That, you know, you've had PETA, and you've had, you know, there have been things, or Frankie says relax, or whether that was a political statement or not is open to debate. But then you go back to the 70s and you look at, let's say, Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren and all of that sort of thing, where politics was so polar. And 40 years later, we're back at that point where we're kind of thinking, you know, if you are a centrist, next time there's an election, I don't know who I'd vote for.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible place to be. You've been disenfranchised through extremist ideology from both main political parties.
You've created a very immersive, very powerful experience with the words and the quotations. What inspired that, and how did you choose the quotations? Because I imagine it must have been an interesting process selecting them. We at this moment have a time where we are very aware of power and its benefits and its abuses, whether it's Me Too, whether it's LGBT, whether it is politics, whether it is whatever. But it is a bit like sort of catching smoke. You know, we're aware of it, but we can't quite articulate it. So when we were putting this together, it was the idea to have floor-to-ceiling literal quotes, and the idea of it was the quote was chosen to have a resonance, and some of them are, you know, we have Marcus Aurelius, and we have, you know, these are quotes. You've got Trump, you've got Obama, you've got Burke, you've got Tom Clancy. I mean, it's very, very eclectic.
That because all of these are either great leaders or great writers, and part of, I suppose, their reason they attained power or attained any form of reputation was the succinctness with which they could articulate a view of power. And the point of these chairs is what I was wanting to create was not something that was a commercial sellable commodity. It was to create almost like a mobile speaker's corner. So anyone could sit and articulate about their view of power within the seat of power. And it sort of became the idea was you know, it's an incredible conceit on my part that you would get people to come and sit in it and talk about power. But the idea was that it would be a bus driver as much as it would be a celebrity. And the initial idea was it would not be a current politician, because I think they have let us down to such an astonishing degree through incompetence and actually having no real gauge of what their role is, and no real understanding of how loathed and in what low opinion they are currently held by their electorate.
Because I think one of the interesting things for me coming here on the first occasion was that, I mean, you talk about how we're very aware of power, but I think there's a sense in which people have forgotten that power ultimately flows from them. They see power being held by business oligarchs, they see it encrusted in algorithms, they see it being held by, as you say, very unsatisfactory representatives. But I'm not sure how powerful they themselves feel, and something about this gives a sense of restoration, I think.
Yes.
Potential restoration, anyway.
Potential, but it's sort of, what is astonishing is obviously, here we are in my showroom, and one half is sort of rugs, and this is totally dedicated to words, and written words, and quotes by well-known people generally. What I'll find is on the pavement, you'll have people staring in through this window, reading this for 10 minutes. And in the next door room, they might look through the window of the next door showroom at the rug in the window, but it won't be for 10 minutes. And in an age where reading and writing has become such a sort of throwaway McDonald's sort of thing, it's not often now you see people sitting down and reading a book. People are reading all the time and people are writing all the time, but it is, abbreviated words distorting the vocabulary.
Yeah.
And this is actually, here it is in its pure form. And that was the point of it.
You have a very rich understanding, not least thanks to your upbringing, of the Irish tradition of language in politics. How has that informed your thinking on this?
In many ways, being an Irishman who was sent to school in England, you are the perpetual outsider. Because although to most people I sound like an Englishman, I think like an Irishman. And when you think like an Irishman, you're thinking like a Neapolitan. It's much more Latin, it's whimsy, it's Yeats, and it's subversive. And when I was little, I sort of had a nanny from Donegal, and she absolutely 100% believed in fairies. Now, if that's your most earliest formative thing, you have a view that is...
You grew up different to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
Probably taken far less seriously than Jacob Rees-Mogg. But, if you actually believe, but he does say, believe and it will happen.
Yes. Maybe
I kind of would rather believe in fairies than believe in his lunatic world. But, each to our own.
Yeah.
But yes, there is always the power of words in Irish. I mean, I used to work in the theatre, and one of my most favourite plays I ever worked on was a play called Translations by Brian Friel, which is an astonishing play in terms of what it is. The whole scenario of it is the English have arrived in, I think it's Donegal or Mayo, somewhere in the west of Ireland, where they all speak Irish. And it's set in a hedge school. So the village masters, teachers, are teaching the village Latin and Greek. Okay, so you have now 4 languages, all spoken in English, going on within this play. And the English are arriving to give new place names to the Gaelic names of the area. And this was it was a genius take on colonialism and how you subvert local identity, local culture, and it's probably done for very pragmatic reasons, like now we want to dominate, control, trade, and we need to know what each place is called. But what this also was an exploration of language, and an exploration of identity, and an exploration of mysticism, and the pragmatism of the English, which is sort of Northern European. I'm convinced the English still suffer from post-Puritan shock from the Civil War, and you kind of think, where is Falstaff? Where is the Falstaff that predates Cromwell?
The cakes and ale.
Yeah, it's sort of, you're kind of thinking, there was that Englishman, and then this happened, and then I think the 18th century Falstaff returned a little bit, and then 19th century he was totally crushed by sort of bourgeois propriety and that sort of thing. So Ireland, it's sort of slightly anarchic. It's slightly view of authority. You don't hold people in particularly high esteem unless you admire them.
Of course, you famously discovered, as one does, Roman mosaics in your home, which rather amazingly informed your work. Has that interest in and passion for the Roman world played a part in your political art?
Totally. Because it gives you a context. And because we now, I think, sadly live in an age where our politicians and political leaders are not informed by history. They seem to think history is a mere bagatelle, and no, that was then and this is now.
It's heritage.
Yeah, and the tragedy of discovering what is now considered, I think, the biggest Roman palace discovered in Britain is I had to pay for the excavation because historic England had no money. Now, when we discovered this, it was the time of the referendum. It was just leading up to the referendum. And it gave a wonderful little snapshot of English, British identity. And one of the things that gave me almost the most pleasure of all was when an excavation is going on, it's kind of intrusive and invasive, but fascinating at the same time and very dull at the same time. And there was this troupe of historians there. And one of them, whose name I can't remember, but a very highly regarded historian and university lecturer, he turned to me and he said, the funny thing is we have empirical, documented evidence of large black communities throughout Britain from the 2nd century AD.
Fascinating.
So black British predates Anglo-Saxon British by 400 years.
Arriving via the
Romans weren't at all racist.
Right.
At all. There was no racial discrimination.
Civis Romanus sum.
Yeah. So there's absolutely no discrimination at all. But what it underlined is to me is sort of this absurdity of what is the English identity. The English identity is mongrel, and that is why it is powerful. That is why we're obsessed with newspapers, because this is a trading island nation, and it was important to see if your ship had docked in Cape Town, whether it was going to get back here. And so we have been African, we have been German, we have been Dutch, we have been Danish, we
Jewish,
have been French, everything.
Yeah.
And that's what makes a stimulated brain. Now, a sort of set in aspic Englishness of blue rinse and twitching net curtains means you are static, means you are not looking outward, you're looking inward. And if you're looking inward, you can never grow, you can never flourish, you can never be in any way forward thinking and innovative and powerful. Now, that's great. I mean, and if Jacob thinks he is Pitt the younger, he's too old to be that, but you know, that
Pitt
can be
slightly older.
I think Pitt the eldest.
The old at heart.
But yeah, so of course it influences everything, because you see, as animals, which we are, our emotional spectrum is identical to the people who lived in the palace that I now live on top of, whether it's rage, love, jealousy, happiness, anger, whatever it happens to be. We have not developed really that much. This desire to embellish our habitat remains entirely the same. These guys had underfloor heating. And I'm kind of thinking, well, I remember underfloor heating coming in as a sort of interior design thing about 20 years ago. And they had baths and they washed. And you kind of think, well, God, really nobody washed here between, 410 and about 1900?
Yeah.
You know, sort of.
It's fairly advanced civilization.
Well, it's sort of this bizarre idea of you kind of think back to the Reformation and what a monumental schism that must have been for the ordinary man. And going back now, so we have this odd thing of Roman palace and this discovery going on while we're having a referendum. And weirdly, it is in lockstep with exactly what is going on now, because these were almost certainly, let's call them English, but they wouldn't have been English because they haven't arrived for another couple of hundred years. Living within the Roman Empire with enormous luxury and power in Wiltshire. The English are far too annoying. The Romans finally turn around and say, we've got other problems, we can't be dealing with you anymore, we're out of here. They leave. And we now have left the biggest single trading superstructure in the world at that time.
Yes.
We then enter something called the Dark Ages for about 600 years. At this moment, we are English, British, living in England in the EU, which is the largest single trading superstructure in the world of our time. So history has constant echoes, and it is not, I disagree, it is not a foreign country. It is a very familiar country, and it just keeps repeating itself over and over again, because we don't really, as an animal, have the imagination to break the patterns.
Yes, it was Mark Twain who said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And there's a dangerous rhyming going on, I think. What do you, I mean, you're going to take this, I believe, around out of Britain at some point elsewhere, is that correct?
That's what I'd love to do, because the conversation, oddly at this moment, is so, to use a word that gives some people here, apparently the people have spoken, the fear, but the conversation is a global one.
Yeah.
Whether it's in India with what Modi's done there, or Hungary with Orban, or America, or wherever you like, extremism has kicked in, and extremism has kicked in because of financial deprivation, as it did in the 1930s, as it did in Russia in the teens. These lurches happen when some form of financial stability is undercut. And so it's just the idea that you can take the temperature of the world, it's too grandiose, but you can take a temperature as a snapshot in time. through this conversation.
And would you like to do more in the sphere of political art, or is that too linear a question to ask of a creative?
Yes, but my next idea is one of such wonderful lunacy that I...
Any teaser trailers?
Yeah,
or clues?
absolutely, with pleasure. Basically, where I live is in the floor of a valley with downs on either side, and I often sort of drive through there, and you see a tree on the brow of the hill, and on the downs above where I live is supposedly sort of folklore where Uther Pendragon's funeral pyre was. Okay, and Uther Pendragon, as you know, is Arthur's father, supposedly. And so what I was thinking, again, and you can see I'm kind of slightly passionate and obsessed about Brexit and about that whole idea of nationalism. And I don't think nationalism has ever generated anything positive or good. And what I was thinking is in my cartoon imaginings of what the Brexiteers, and I don't like using that word because it makes them sound too heroic, they want the 1950s or 1908 and some sun-dappled lawn and people playing croquet and eating cucumber sandwiches, and we're masters of the universe.
News and
and it's
black tie.
And very absurd, in a bygone age, Jacob would have been a BBC presenter.
Yes.
So my thinking is on the brow of a hill out of the corner of your eye, what I want to do is put up an enormous sculpture of a giant.
Fantastic.
And so you would see, as you're walking, is that a giant walking along? Because if we're going to go be revisionist, let's go back to an age when we were truly heroic. When there was an age of giants and magic and folklore. And where is, England, you look at England, this wonderful, magical country that is perversely obsessed with history, and their history is very, very short. It's only 1,000 years compared to a lot of European nations. But where is its folklore? Where has it gone? Was William the Conqueror Pol Pot? Was 1066 year zero and all Anglo-Saxon folklore crushed? Was all Celtic folklore crushed? Was the sort of Romano-British folklore absolutely wiped out? Why is there just Robin Hood and the slight whispers of Arthur?
So rising from the soil comes a giant.
Comes a giant dragging a club along, and so you'd have the Angel of the North and the Giant of the South.
Brilliant. What better way to end? Thank you so much, Luke.
Been a pleasure, man.